Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well. And for today's video, I am very excited because I have a very, very special guest today because I am talking with the wonderful particle physicist, author, and also gigantic Trekkie, Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. And I am so honored that you agreed to talk with me today because I have been a fan of your book, The Disordered Cosmos, for a while now, and I just love talking with Trekkie nerds who love to talk about social and political and like racial and gendered issues within nerddoms and all of those things. So, just very excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Yeah. And just to let listeners know, we're going to have a wonderful conversation, but you have a brand new book coming out, just to put this right up front, that is coming out as of this recording in about a week called The Edge of Space-Time. You have it right there, and I am so excited. So that's what we're here to talk about mainly. We'll get talking about that book towards the end of the interview. But I'm very excited to read it when it comes out. It should be very fun. So.
Yeah, the Edge of Space-Time was such a journey to write, and so I'm so curious to see how people are going to experience it. But I hope, especially given everything that's going on right now, that it gives people a little bit of respite and some joy. There's lots of queerness. There's this whole section called queer phenomenology. So I
Yes.
wanted it to
Okay.
be super black. I wanted it to feel queer, and I hope those feelings will be in there for people.
Hell yeah. No, that sounds really amazing and legitimately right up my alley because I'll just say this. And I found the Disordered Cosmos. I was just sort of finding, I found it in my local bookstore and I'm like, why? I found it like about a year or so ago and but it came out in 2021 and I was like, why have I not found this earlier? Because I just like a Trekkie who is just like talking about particle physics and like dark matter and like comparing it and talking about it through like just like our social moment right now. I was like, this is so everything that I wanted in a book. So I was like, why have I not gotten a chance to talk to you before? So I was like, yes, good. This is a good excuse. um, well, I wanted to just to like, in case my audience hasn't heard about you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, so I guess the standard stuff is I'm an associate professor of physics and astronomy and core faculty in women's and gender studies at the University of New Hampshire.
Nice.
And I am also an author now of two books. I actually do have a third book in the pipeline
Hell
that
yeah. Okay, very
I'm
cool.
I'm taking a break from editing to go on book tours. I will also be throughout April and also a couple of dates in June and September be touring around the United States.
Yeah.
So you should check out my publisher's website, Pantheon Books, to see if I might be coming near you. And I'm queer, I'm Black. I grew up working class. I'm originally from East LA, so shout out to all the other Angelinos out there. And I'm a proud product of public schools and arts education. And I really feel as a scientist that I'm really grateful that I grew up in an environment where I was doing lots of performing arts.
Yeah. No, I was one of the things that I really appreciate about Disordered Cosmos that you were talking about in it was just how your history and your own just background informed how you talked about science. And that was just a really cool through line throughout the whole book that I just wanted to ask you about because one of the things that we think about with science, at least, culturally here in America and a lot of Western culture, is that like, oh, science is all about just like, oh, there's objective truth that we're finding. But a lot of how we interpret and come at science is very much informed by a lot of biases and cultures and our own personal perception as well. So, I know that's a big topic. It's kind of what the whole book is about, but I'm sort of curious just to start us off, like how did you personally find yourself drawn towards science? I know there's a really wonderful story you talked about going to Joshua Tree with your mom that was so evocative to me in the book. Yeah, I'm just so curious.
Yeah, I showed an early interest in math when I was like 6 years old. I wanted to learn my times tables. I became really obsessed with them when I learned them. And so people in my family kind of knew that I was kind of heading in that direction. And then when I was 10, I got exposed to my first kind of physical science class at school. And my teacher told my mom, you need to like take her for enrichment.
Hmm.
She's clearly really into this stuff.
She's clearly a
And
giant nerd.
yeah, huge fucking nerd. That's like that in summary. He may have in
Mhm.
fact said that knowing Mr. Wilson. Like,
I love it when
and
teachers see us, like they, oh, I see you. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
And he was a teacher I was so lucky to have as a math and science teacher.
Mhm.
And so my mom read in the newspaper that there was a documentary that was only showing in one theater in Los Angeles on the other side of town on the west side at the Lemley, and it was Errol Morris's A Brief History of Time, which was a
Mm.
documentary about Stephen Hawking, came out around the same time that Hawking's book of the same title came out. And so we could only afford to go to a matinee
Mhm.
and plus gas money and all of that. My mom dragged me on a Saturday morning to go see this documentary. And I was 10 and I was like, what are we doing here?
I want to
X-Men
get up.
cartoons are on. I want to
Mm.
see Storm. I want to see Rogue. What are we doing? Like
Beautiful.
I was not happy. And halfway through the documentary, Stephen Hawking's talking about how his job is to use math to solve problems that Einstein hadn't worked out. And I was like, hold up, this is a job? You can do math and it explains the universe and people pay you. This is a
Like
job?
actual money.
That's my job. I'm doing that. That's what I want to do. And so I came out of the movie theater like begging my mom for a copy of A Brief History of Time. And she's like, oh, I don't know. It might be kind of discouraging for you. And so my uncle got it for me that year for my 11th birthday. My uncle Peter, to whom actually The Edge of Space Time is partly dedicated to him in honor of this. But that was it. I was sold. I knew I wanted to do theoretical physics and I knew I wanted to do cosmology. And that was how I got started.
Amazing. There's something in your story that you already just mentioned, and also you've kind of touched upon in the book goes into like just getting that encouragement at that age is really so important to how we develop and how we are able to get interests. And you talk a lot about how that access to that, both the support and just like the financial aspect of it, like just even there, we're talking about like getting across town is not something we give to everybody in the United States and just Western culture generally. And so I'm curious, like when you started being self-aware of that, because I know that it's something that a lot of parents try to protect kids from. And I'm sort of like curious how that like helped your development or like influenced your development getting into science.
You know, I think I was kind of unusual for a kid of kind of my socioeconomic background in that I had higher resource access than a lot
Mhm.
of the other kids from East LA. Like I actually had internet access really early. I was using CompuServe on DOS, like before
Oh
Windows
wow.
had been
Okay. Yeah.
released.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember I first learned about ADHD because, like, alphabetically, that was one of the first forums. Like, if
Yeah.
you were just
Hmm.
going through the list, and I
I
was
was like,
like, okay,
oh,
I'm just going to go into the ADHD. I had like no idea what that was at that
yeah.
age, right? And so I really benefited from that. It's also because I come from an immigrant family
Hmm.
and my parents are both political organizers.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember you
I
talking.
actually got shuffled around quite a bit, and my grandmother lives in London, which is where my dad partly grew up, and so I got to travel internationally, which is somewhat unusual for kids of my background, although maybe not so much for immigrant families. That's often something when people scrounge up money, that's one of the things that they scrounge up money for.
Hmm.
And so I didn't really have a strong sense of there are things that we don't have until I had some awareness of this. Like I was really close friends and continue to be friends with Samantha Anderson, the daughter of Conchata Ferrell,
Oh
the
yeah, yeah,
actress.
yeah, yeah,
And so Chatty, as we knew her, was like my drama teacher for several years
yeah.
in
Amazing.
elementary school. And um, I had some awareness that they had more than we did because I got
Mhm.
all of Samantha's hand-me-downs for clothing.
Yeah,
And that was basically like the only reason I had like anything interesting to wear to school was because I was smaller and so Samantha always had things that fit me that she had moved out of even though we were basically the same age. And So that was an element of it. And then when I went to high school, I went to a high school on the west side. It was a public school, but it was a magnet, and I was bussed in. I had 3 hours round trip every day on the school bus. And there I was surrounded by kids whose parents had like a lot more than we did. And I think that
Hmm.
that was my first awareness of, oh, my mom drives a shittier car than what these people are getting as like
Yeah, yeah.
birthday presents from their parents.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that was my first like, oh, we really don't. And the other thing is that things get more expensive, prom tickets, all of that stuff.
Yeah, as you
It
get
starts to
older.
come out.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I what I found so fascinating about the book, like just when it comes to science, kind of I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but like how that comes into how we start thinking about the cosmos and science and like all of that socioeconomic aspect of it. I remember, so I was reading this book on the Star Trek cruise last year, and I was reading the chapter where you talk about the curvature of space-time and how for Western culture, I mean, you can explain this better than I can, so I'll kind of toss to you. So, like, I'll give my sort of very layman's idea of it, but how Western culture thinks very linearly and time very linearly, and so the idea that time, that space, sort of went on infinitely and extended on infinitely, sort of came naturally to Western thinkers, but how we are starting to discover that space-time may in fact be curved, and so like the idea that like you could keep going and eventually you'll come back to the same point in space, and how other cultures who do think of time more as a circular, or think of space and like even the earth, think of like spheres as more of a natural element of the building blocks of the universe, were more open to understanding that more immediately. And yet there's this cultural perception of like Western thought is so much more advanced, and this uh, very supremacist and also very diminutive look at other cultures' ideas of science. And I was explaining that to other people on the Star Trek cruise. I was like trying to explain all that just casually, like, yeah, this is the book I'm reading, and they were like, uh-huh. And so I'm just so curious, like, as you were getting into, I say all that to say, sorry, I'm explaining your book to you, but just to give audience reference, but like, uh, how did that start to um come up to you as you were going into science and starting to realize like, oh, my perspective on the world may be different than those around me, and it informs how I come to understand and be excited about science differently than other folks.
I mean, something that I talk about in the book is I have a chapter where I talk about astronomy in Hawaii
Mhm. Yes, yes, yeah.
and uh, Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiians who have objected to the building of telescopes on Mauna
Mm,
Kea, which is this mountain volcano. It has very pristine seeing. There are lots of reasons why astronomers would want to use it as a site. It is also unceded land that is the traditional homeland of Kanaka people. And also in Kanaka spiritual traditions, it is a sacred place. And
mhm.
so the disruption of it through construction, building of telescopes is actually disruptive. It's like building something in the middle of a church
Yeah.
is maybe the closest analog for people who are kind of oriented by American religious hegemony, right? And so I had kind of had this life and career where, of course, I knew that there were different cultural traditions, but I was raised as a physicist. I did a bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. And then there was this moment in 2014 when they were trying to build a new telescope on the Mauna, and in, indigenous folks blocked them. So Kanaka
Hmm.
people blocked them, and astronomers turned to the power of the state to retaliate. They had them
Hmm.
arrested. There was a lot of ugly discourse, racist comments flying around about Native people. And my mother's family is from Barbados. And my father partly grew up in Trinidad. So I have a very strong sense of identity as someone who is in relationship to islands. And
Hmm.
so my immediate reaction to that, one, as someone who already understood, I understood myself as anti-colonial. Like I knew I was against colonialism.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking, if this was happening to my island, what would I want people to be doing? And it was my responsibility to do this for them. And I talk in the book about how actually I'd been presented with a professional opportunity to go to Hawaii a decade before that. And I had turned it down because I knew that these kinds of protests were happening.
Hmm.
But at that point in my career in 2014, I already had my PhD. I was starting to develop a voice on social media that some people paid attention to. And so I started speaking out about it and then realized I'm having this crisis. How can I work with these people who are talking
Hmm.
about Indigenous folks like this? Like, how can
Yeah.
this be my professional community? And I also wanted to situate it in context, and I started reading. And this was the point at which I started to understand that there was this whole other world of history of science, anthropology of science, sociology of science that put in context all of these things that I had been taught about where knowledge came from, how knowledge becomes,
Hmm.
like and how it is received, how it circulates, and where ideas begin. And I will say, even actually with the disordered cosmos, I was at one stage of my learning when I wrote that book. And when I
Hmm.
wrote The Edge of Space Time, my newer release, I was at a different stage, and you can actually see
See
in the
that.
text my deepened understanding of, for example, some ideas that we typically assign to Europeans actually originate in the Muslim world, from
Yeah.
Africa, from the Middle East, or what we might call the Middle East, right? So I think that was part of it. And so just to come back to what you were talking about, like a very specific example, is this idea of what is intuitive.
Hmm.
I think that's
Hmm.
really what you're pointing to. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Exactly. Yeah.
we're in the American K through 12 education system, the thing we're integrated into is Cartesian straight
Hmm.
lines at 90-degree angles, and everything is kind of relative to that. And in the course of my reading, I was starting to learn about other cultures that use systems that had curvature built into them. And then I started, as someone who was trained as a relativist, like general relativity was one of my topic exams for my topic defense, my PhD. I was like, wait a minute. I wonder if I had grown up with that as like my orienting system,
Yeah.
whether actually general relativity wouldn't seem like such a big leap intellectually in the ways that it is.
Yeah, and so we're both Trekkies, and this is part of what I wanted to talk to you about too. Because you even bring it up in the Disordered Cosmos, but it reminds me of Deep Space Nine so much about time and
Mm.
how that show views time and how time is relative. It is very relative to how we perceive it, and yet time in again Western thought is always seen very linearly. Like there's always a forward progress of time. We're always progressing, and other cultures don't perceive it that way. And you get Cisco in the very first episode of Deep Space Nine explaining to the prophets who see time non-linearly how he views time linearly and how he values that as a chance to view humanity as he explains how humans look at time as a way to explore. And yet they also influence him about how he is stuck in his trauma and he exists in his moments of trauma. And so he himself is nonlinear as well,
I
even though
live
he's
here.
exactly. And it's something that I continually return to as like a trans person relating to that show so deeply of like the traumas that the queer community exists under and how we are sometimes drawn into that, but then how we sort of use that as a place of strength to sort of look forward and think of how we can create a better future by glancing at the past but not being defined by the past. And I know that that's an experience across marginalization. And so I guess the question that I have for you is just a Trekkie and also a scientist, and sort of going on that journey of like the relativity of how we understand science and what's intuitive, how that sort of all influenced your thinking on science, both as being a Trekkie and a science fiction nerd, and also looking at the culture of science. Sorry, I know that's a big question, but I'm just like,
Yeah,
it's
no,
just,
I mean, I love talking about DS9, and I particularly love thinking about Cisco as the emissary.
hmm
And I think actually one of the really interesting things narratively about DS9 was the way that the prophets became this opportunity for the writers and the viewers to kind of think about religion
mm,
and the idea of God or gods
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
relation to space-time and science, and how they actually resolve it in a very nice way by saying what the Bajorans understand as their gods are simply these beings that don't experience time in the same way that humanoids do.
yeah, yeah.
And I always found that to be a really fascinating resolution. And, we should always understand, I think, Star Trek as just being stories about ourselves and humanity's relationship, different parts of humanity's relationship with other parts of humanity, right?
Yes.
And so I think that that is in part a thought experiment for us about our assumptions about perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And DS9 did a lot of that. I think, like, particularly for those of us who have at best complicated relationships with the gender binary
Yeah.
or with sexuality, cisgenderness, however, whatever version of that speaks to you. I think one of the really beautiful things about DS9 was the way that the writers' room didn't know what they were doing with the trill.
Yeah. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of talking about people going through transitions and having one
hmm
body for a while and then realizing that another body was the right body for them at that time.
Yes. Yeah.
And queer and particularly trans fans reflecting back to the community, this is our story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might not have realized you were telling our story, but you're
Well, you did.
telling
Yeah.
at least a version of our story. And then to see future iterations of Trek, like Star Trek Discovery,
hmm
take up that fan interpretation and make it canon,
Yes.
and literally make it canon. And then we have like all of season three, that's just basically a whole season about queer love.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm
Okay.
getting off track, but
No, I'm like, yes, Trekkie. We're great. No, I love it.
I
But
guess I
please.
will say, like, on some level, there's there's a version of that that you can interpret as what Amiri Baraka, the Black arts poet, um, called rhythm traveling in the Black tradition.
Yeah.
We also see this um, in the film Sinners,
Yes.
which is not necessarily easily readable as a queer text. I think we could make some arguments for the way in which it is a queer
hmm
text. It's a Black liberation vampire film is maybe the best summary of it, right?
Yes. No, I love Sinners for exact. I think I know where you're heading, and yeah.
And there's this one scene in the middle where time collapses because people are rhythm traveling through the music, and you see the past, present, and future of Black music
hmm
all together on the dance floor, making beats in the same place. And I think in its own way, Trek has functioned in this way, in this kind of dynamic relationship. And so I think we're also kind of in a meta way having our own experience with our relationship to time and how we and how our narrative choices are shaped by how we think about time, I guess.
Yeah. Have you ever read one of my favorite authors, Jose Esteban Munoz, and his sort of discussion of queer futurism? I think you might have
Yes,
mentioned him in
so
your book. I think he's in.
I do mention him in The Disordered Cosmos and also in The Edge of Space Time because Queerness as Futurity, I think, was so influential for me.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that when I read his book, for listeners, it is. Why am I blanking on now? It's right over there. Uh, um, I'm so
Is it
sorry.
actually called Queerness as Futurity?
No, queer futurism, his like his philosophy that he sort of articulates, but I'm blanking on. It's literally right over there, but I'll put it up here for listeners. I'll put the book on screen. But when I read his book,
Cruising Utopia,
Cruising
the
Utopia.
then and there of queer futurity.
Thank you so much. You are
Yeah.
amazing. I should have had
That
it
was
on
going to
hand.
make me nuts.
I
So
know. No, I knew I was gonna probably bring him up at some point, and I was like, I'll remember the title. I have it, and then I didn't have it prepped on my cheat sheet here, so that's on me. You got it. That's why you're the scientist.
I
But
just looked it up.
no, that's what I'm saying. The scientist looks it up. It's good. But no, I when I read him, I connected that so much to Star Trek for exactly the reasons you are articulating, because he articulates queerness as this idea of reaching for a utopia on the horizon that we will never arrive at by glancing to the past, seeing where we've come from, and trying to move in a new way in our moment right now that replicates that future in the small moments between us. And understanding that, and I looked at something like Star Trek, which is to me kind of all about that, whereas so many people read Star Trek as this static utopia that we're reaching, that we like should exist within. And I always see Star Trek as this commentary on what our present would look like if we actually chose to move in a different way. And it's always about reflecting not a future as it will necessarily 100% be, but saying, if we did this today, I mean, yes, sure, all the technology and the warp travel would be nice, and we could have that. But if we just treated people this way right now, we could have that future in this moment. And it's always that interesting relationship to queerness that I think Star Trek and I think Deep Space Nine captures so well. And it was just when I was reading your book, to bring it back to the book instead of, again, I knew I wanted to have this conversation with you. I apologize. This is more conversational than necessarily question interview, but it was something that when I was reading your book, I was like, oh, this conversation just exists within how we very much fundamentally understand how we explore the cosmos itself. And I just loved your constant relating that to how we explore and understand things. Um, and there was this oh, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, this your chapter on dark matter, and how we think about dark matter as this, metaphor often for like blackness, and how you push back against that in a really beautiful way. And I'm sort of like, curious to see how like what you're sort of thinking about that as we relate science to our understanding of humanity as well, I guess is the best way to put that question.
Yeah, so when I wrote The Disordered Cosmos, I was kind of coming off, I was moving into doing some work in Black studies and Black feminist studies, and had become very aware that there was this metaphor flying around of comparing Black people to dark matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the metaphor kind of hinged on the idea of like Black people are invisible, but so much depends on Black people. And actually, my introduction to that was I saw a white woman scientist use the metaphor in an article and was
Mm.
like, what in the ever living fuck is this? I was like, particularly like this particular person, I was like, you don't have a good track record with Black students. So
Yeah, it's like, why are you making this metaphor?
right. And then I became aware that this was actually a metaphor that was in wide circulation in Black studies and that Black people
Mm.
had taken it up. And I was realizing that part of that was that when people in Black studies wanted to go to physics to look for metaphor to engage with the figurative, they only had white scientists writing to go to. And there was almost a translation issue of how people were taking this up, that um, the invisibility metaphor reads to white scientists who haven't thought about race very much in a
Mm.
particular way. And the word dark reads to white scientists who haven't thought about race very much in a particular
Yes.
way. And dark has a whole other set of meanings attached to it for those of us in the Black community, especially people who are attuned to issues of colorism.
Mm.
Um, and as a light-skinned person, this was something that I had thought about because it shapes my social location and the ways in which I am empowered in certain environments that people who are darker than me may not be empowered by. And that's just like not a thought process necessarily that my white colleagues are even at all attuned to at all,
Mm.
right? And so I was really bugged by this metaphor because I was like, the other thing is that there is this kind of feeling of by telling people that Black people are dark matter, you're also almost admitting, and I put this in air quotes, but admitting, yes, Black people are a different type of thing than white people are. And I
Mm.
was very troubled by this, particularly at the height of discourses about Black Lives Matter, that we were seeing all of these instances of the police being like, well, I thought the cell phone was a gun. And it was like, Black people are all Odo and can magically shapeshift things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was really troubled by that. And so I decided to kind of write against it and be like, look, it should really be called invisible matter because when we think the word dark for so many of us invokes a sense of color, invokes a sense
Mm-hmm.
of like this is an object that absorbs light, right? Like we all know if we were those of us who are very goth oriented, we go out in all black in the summertime, we're going to be absorbing that
Yes.
heat, right?
Yep.
Instead of reflecting it off. But in the case of what we call dark matter, it is the majority of the matter in the universe, the
Mm-hmm.
majority of the normally gravitating matter in the universe, and light doesn't interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's typically how we think of like something that's invisible, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And so in the Disordered Cosmos, I was really kind of writing against that and wanted to kind of clarify for people, here is the conversation that you are incidentally having
Yeah.
when you make this comparison. It is interesting actually, like kind of in hindsight looking at that, because in the edge of space time, I decided that I would use the figure of an invisible enemy to
Yes. I
talk
wanted
about
to.
dark matter. So let me
Yes,
actually see if
please.
I can like hold it up for the screen. Um,
So,
so
listeners, if
this
you're
is
watching this on video, check out the video right now because I'll put it up on big screen there for you.
yeah, and for people who pick up the edge of space time, it's on page 226. So and it's in chapter 14. And so the invisible envy is clearly just me playing with the invisible man and being like,
Hmm.
I'm not doing the invisible man. And the point is because there's so much dark matter out there, it literally shapes where visible matter, like the stuff that interacts with light,
Hmm.
is.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind the invisible envy, this would have been the right time for me to hold it up. So let me hold it up again for people who are
Please.
watching on YouTube. So you don't actually see a face there, right? You don't see
Hmm.
hands, but you see this very dapper hat and suit. And my best friend Sharifa, who drew the figures, even
It's
gave them a
amazing.
monocle. I love the monocle. That was not my idea. That was entirely Sharifa's idea. She gets all the credit for it.
Now,
And the
now I want to
idea,
have more MBs with monocles. It's great. It's make it a
right?
thing.
It's a very dapper envy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the idea is that this person is invisible for maybe fill in the movie if you're a fan of the science fiction The Invisible NB, and or it would have been The Invisible Man, but we need a remake. I guess I'm
We
making the
do.
case for a
We
remake
do.
here.
I am here for it. I am very much here for it.
And the idea is that even though you know the invisible NB is there because the suit is filled out and the hat is sitting in the right
Hmm.
place, the only evidence that you can see for their presence is the suit.
Yeah.
And so this is exactly like dark matter kind of shapes where visible matter is.
Hmm.
And so I decided to kind of play around with this metaphor, but kind of do it in a way that, at least to me, felt empowering. Of saying, this isn't because society has made you invisible. It is because this is a way of being that this particular character has chosen.
Hmm.
And they've got a fucking awesome suit to go with it.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. It's so fascinating because yeah, it is with dark matter, it even shapes like how we're able to see light, right? Like with gravitational lensing, we can sort of see how like mass is affected, has affects how we perceive things and are able to like look at things. And yet we actually don't know what dark matter is. And that's
No.
so and it's interesting placing that as a metaphor for non-binary people because our culture just does not seem to understand or perceive non-binary. I was actually just talking about this with my therapist about I'm non-binary, and I'm sure you've had this experience too, where I was at WonderCon yesterday, and there was a guy, and I was wearing like very feminine outfits, but then the bartender's like, "Oh, hello, like, what can I get you, my brother?" And, like he said that in like in a gendered way, and I'm like, What element of me did you
Mm.
perceive that way? That like put me in a bucket of guy as opposed to girl, and not necessarily seeing my non-binariness, but having to put it in one of those two buckets. And it's just the thing that like my non-binariness always gets shoved in one of two ways, and it doesn't get seen. And so that's very very fascinating. And I know you're a gender as well. Um, and so I'm like, how does that sort of influence your perception of like yourself and how others perceive you, especially in science and like talking about all of these things?
You know, I like kind of the point that you're making, which is that these identities get invisibilized
Hmm. Hmm.
by our social norms. Like even the assumption that everyone has a gender. I think it took me a
Exactly.
really
Yes.
long time. I remember at some point, my journey to understanding myself as an agender person really actually started with um, trying to make sense of people around me who were coming out as trans.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And so it was well before there was a lot of mainstream conversation, good or bad, that was
Yeah.
happening about trans people.
Yeah.
And I knew well enough to know that I had to respect someone's sense. Like if someone said, I'm a woman, I'm a man, that was who the fuck am I to be arguing with them about it? They
Yeah.
say these are their pronouns, this is their name, that's what I do. But I was very troubled for several years because I was like, I don't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I was like, well, this is clearly just my internalized transphobia. And there was probably some element of that. We're socialized into transphobia. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure many of us just have some internalized ish.
Everyone does to some degree, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah.
At some point, I had a light bulb go off over my head. And I was like, wait, are the other people having gender? Like, is that what the issue is? And so I went to my spouse and I was like, do you have like an internal sense? And he was like, yes. And I was
Mm.
like, no, I don't. Like, I don't.
Interesting.
I
Yeah, yeah.
I was assigned female at birth. I'm fine with people saying that I'm a woman. Like I like social. I often socially present that way. Don't always, but I often socially present that way. But I was like, there is nothing inside of me telling me that I am attached to this thing
Interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah.
beyond my assignment. And then I was like, I don't have an internal sense of gender. It's not that I don't understand trans people's experience with gender. I don't understand anybody's experience with gender. And I think that that was for me like the light bulb moment of like, I don't get it with the cis people. I just like,
I
I
mean, to
don't,
be fair, I cis people have so much. I don't get them either. It's great. They're very confusing to me.
that's,
But yes,
I
not
mean,
to, just
yes,
yes,
I'm always
jokingly.
like, are the straights okay? The answer is no.
No, no.
But I just, that was really kind of, I mean, it, as a queer person, I feel like all of us have, especially growing up in American society, we all have like these moments like this. Like I
Hmm.
remember talking to my high school best friend at some point and being like, wait, so you don't fantasize about women? And she was like, no.
Gosh,
And I was like, I just assumed everybody
you did
did.
that. Yeah, yeah. Oh God, yeah. It's so fascinating. Yeah, and it's. I mean, it goes to that idea of like double consciousness, right? Of like having to
Yeah.
constantly be aware of others, how others perceive you, but then also having to construct your own internal sense of self. That like it's always like, oh, this is not how you perceive me at all, and now I have to like understand your perception of me and my perception of you, and that's so it's very fascinating to like come to that realization of being agender because I myself am non-binary, but I also I see that as its own sense of gender in its own weird way that I identify with that is separate from woman, even though I don't mind being perceived as woman more than I do perceive being as man. And that's such a fascinating difference to be like, I don't have a perception of gender for my own internal self while also being involved in it in so many different ways. That's so utterly fascinating. That's so cool. I love that. Yeah.
And I think, in terms of the way that this shapes me as a scientist, I think that it makes it so much easier for me to look at something and say, okay, that's a normalization. That's not hardwired into how the thing works. That's
Mm-hmm.
just how we've oriented
Oriented it.
ourselves to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking like there's a section of The Edge of Space-Time that's called Queer Phenomenologies. And this is riffing off of Sarah Ahmed's book, Queer Phenomenology.
Yes, with queer use and in all of her. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yes, 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 yes.
And she has all of this discussion in the book about orientation and what is the meaning of the word orientation and orienting ourselves. And some of that is like, okay, we orient ourselves towards straightness, or we don't. We orient
Mm-hmm.
ourselves towards a gender binary, or we don't. And I look back on moments when I was a kid and really chafed against being asked to be categorized with the girls.
Yeah,
This was
yeah.
something that I chafed against a lot as a child. And it wasn't because I had an internal sense of I am a boy and need to be with the boys, but I also felt like I just wanted to be wherever I wanted to
When to
be,
be. Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's like, why are you
And
putting me in this bucket when I just want to not be forced into a
right.
bucket in any way? Yeah.
And I think, there's the compulsory cisgender and cissexuality of it means that we orient ourselves towards a binary that at least some of us are going to chafe against because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense for our own internal sense of identity. And so I think naturally, as a scientist, I think that made it easier for me to make the leap that there are other things that I need to ask questions about. Is that what is naturally into, like, what's natural? What's intuitive?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my writing in both books kind of swirls around these questions. And I think that that has a lot to do with my experiences of being queer.
Yeah. And it's this might be a bit of a interesting journey here, but like it's also about what we build because I've been reading Sarah too recently because I've been writing about Starfleet Academy, weirdly enough. Which I know you're also a
Ooh,
fan of as well. I know I'm angry about what happened there as well. We
yes.
um but I've been writing about it, and one of the things that I was talking about with it is especially the reaction to Academy. Sorry to, I know this, I will promise I'll bring this back around. But it was,
No, I can talk about Academy.
oh,
Let's
wait,
do
wait,
it.
it's, but it was, to just touch on what you're saying is like a lot of the reaction against Academy was this idea of, oh, Star Trek is for this certain person, a white cis straight dude of an older generation, and having a Star Trek show like Discovery before it, but a Star Trek show that's for younger folks, that is tailored for, that is orienting around queer folks and black folks and other people of color and younger people. And that's not what it was supposed, like that's not what Star Trek is for. That's not what Starfleet is for. It's not, that's not what we're orienting it around. And I was writing about Sarah for her idea of queer use and looking at
Mm.
characters like Ake, who sits in her chair, her captain's chair, in such that unique way. And so many people targeted her online, being like, she's not sitting as the authoritative captain. And I'm like, but she's using it in her own way. She is not modeling herself after Kirk or Picard, who sit in it with that sort of like way we think of authority, but she's orienting herself and like I'm going to take this and use it in my own way to queer the way that it is supposed to be used, and use it
Mm.
and not in the way it's supposed to be used, but in its own unique way. And to bring it back to what you were saying, but we can also talk about Academy because I'll talk about Academy with you all day because I love it. But it's talking about science too, and the tools that like science in our culture is like we oriented around. It's supposed to be helping progress Western society or lead us to this predetermined outcome that we need to get to. I think of like your Elon Musk's being like, we're gonna be a Zephyrin Cochrane's and become like the Rocketeers of the world and like be our great man of society. When actually there's so many ways to perceive and interpret and understand the cosmos, because while we tend to think of it as some universal truth and there are truths to discover about the universe, it is relative in many ways. And I think that that's just a fascinating thing you draw out so beautifully in your work that just like really sparked my brain. Again, sorry, I know I'm kind of bouncing off of you without having a question necessarily, but I'm sort of curious, like your thoughts on that aspect of how do like the tools that we are given to try to understand the universe aren't able to fit who we are, and how that sort of influenced you as a scientist, and then as a Trekkie, if you want to talk about Starfleet Academy, because I'm here for that as well.
In my Black feminist science studies work, I developed a concept that actually was I guess not surprisingly, but maybe hilariously controversial with conservatives who didn't read the paper. I developed this concept of white
Conservatives not
empiricism.
reading with media literacy. I'm shocked. So shocked. Anyway, sorry, I
So
cut you
shocked.
off.
So I developed this concept of white empiricism, and in the paper where I developed it, like the main part of the title is making Black women scientists under white empiricism. And so the assumption was that the claim that I was making was that Black people will discover different science, that I was making some kind of bizarre essentialist claim about, like, I don't know, the relationship between melanin and the discovery of physical law. But actually, the claim that I was making is when people are biased
Mm-hmm.
by, for example, white supremacy, they ignore data that is salient to actually
Mm.
uncovering how things actually work.
Yes.
And so this is basically saying that you are inhibiting your own practice of actually being data-based and data-oriented, and that this is
Mm-hmm.
bad scientific practice. And so
Yeah.
that racism is bad scientific practice. It makes you worse at science. You can make a similar argument, this obsession with, even though actually all the good science says the gender binary isn't real, that people are still trying to force this onto the science, and they've realized that the only way that they can do it is actually by executive order because they can't actually get the science to agree with them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just authority,
Um,
like needing authority. Like, no, we're gonna force authority downwards instead of
right.
being using it to be curious about building how we perceive the universe.
Exactly. And there are historical examples of this. Like the Nazis were really committed to this idea of Aryan physics, where they were like, we
Mm-hmm.
have to throw out all of the physics that was developed by Jewish scientists. And that turns out to be a lot of
Good
modern
side.
physics and a lot of really good. And so things stop making sense, right?
Yeah.
And there was also like the literal thing of by chasing off a lot of their Jewish scientists, that they actually undercut their own capacity for scientific development. And
Mm-hmm.
Germany went from being the epicenter of global physics before the Nazis took power to really struggling. And of course, they have a strong scientific community now, but never recovered that centrality culturally. And so the point I was really just trying to make was like, if you really want to be a data oriented, data based person, you can't commit to these ideologies that
Mm-hmm.
tell you don't look at this data because it's not convenient to your worldview.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I feel like we see a lot of this in relation to how people interpret Star Trek. And I want to pick
Yes.
specifically the example of Jaden, the
Mm-hmm.
the Klingon student who we learn is gay.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, I mean, I think Karim Diane, the actor who plays Jaden, has said gay. So I won't hypothesize about bisexual, but I will say that it's never actually said in the show that he's
Mm-hmm.
not bisexual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the amount of panic that people had about Jaden wearing a skirt.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I it was well, we were at WonderCon, and there was a panel about Starfleet Academy, and
Yeah.
we opened up to questions, and there was a black man who came up and said, "I hated Academy because I'm used to Hollywood emasculizing black men, and I don't want to see a black man in a skirt." And there was my friend Giraffe sort of pointed out, she's a person of color as well. She's
I
black as
love
well.
Giraffe.
Yeah, she's a mutual friend of ours. Yeah. And she pointed out too, it's like there's an understandable hurt there of how Hollywood has treated black men, but that's also not what this character is
That's
either.
not what this is at all. He's
Yeah.
actually very masculine
Yes. Yeah.
and macho.
Yeah.
He's also just a person with some emotional intelligence who also just happens to like dick or whatever the like
Yeah.
species appropriate
Yeah.
version of
Well, we
that
know
is,
Klingons.
right?
This is my own funny thing. Is that we know Klingons have redundant organs, so
That's what I'm just saying. At least one,
Yes, at
maybe
least one.
two.
Yes.
Um, and I really there's I understand the issue around emasculation, but really the connection of like gay men
Mm-hmm.
with emasculation in the
Translation.
first place is
Yes.
just a deeply homophobic position,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And homophobia doesn't have a color line, although it can take specific shapes and forms in specific communities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I really just think like the reaction to that we saw over and over again was Klingons don't wear skirts. And I was like, who says?
Yeah. Why?
Who says?
Mm-hmm.
Romans wore them. Like I don't, are you saying that, I mean, actually the Romans were pretty gay. So maybe that's not really a good example.
But that no, but it is because it is like so many. You have so many, especially white supremacists, sort of romanticizing Roman culture. Like I can't stop thinking about the Roman Empire, but it is a nostalgic pressing upon idea of Roman culture that never actually existed, as they also do with American culture, and it erases actual truths of that society. And the same thing with the Klingons. For me, it was like the Klingons have been perceived as this warrior culture, and sort of people placing upon it this sort of conceptualization of masculinity, our own conceptualization of masculinity on it, of like they're men, they're strong men. But then we see in Deep Space Nine, Klingons are like, oh, let me like as soon as I hear someone else's like new name, Jadzia's new name, I use that instantaneously. And so there is an acceptance of that. But also there's misogyny as we've seen in Klingon culture too. So it's like every culture has its own relative norms. And so who's to say what the skirt means in Klingon culture in any way, shape, or form?
So there's that. There's also the fact that literally a millennium has passed.
Yeah,
And
like
so even
yeah,
if I was
yes.
supposed to accept that in like the 2600s or the 2400s,
Mm-hmm.
that such and such is Klingon culture, like we're in the, I think it's supposed to be the
Yeah,
3300s.
30, yeah, 32nd century, I think is the so yeah,
Yeah.
3300, yeah, yeah.
So who knows? I mean, first
Mm-hmm.
of all, Klingon culture has been forced to change a lot by the
Mm-hmm.
burn.
Yes, the
They've
diaspora that they're in, and yep.
They're in a diaspora. They are now having the experience of feeling disempowered and having to deal with the intersection of their cultural narratives about themselves with their
Mm-hmm.
material conditions. There's a very deep thought there about the way that something that could parallel genocide
Mm-hmm.
guts people culturally and requires transformation and how they will hold on to the past while also envisioning a future for themselves. And I think
Yeah.
that the Academy does that beautifully with the Klingons. Um, I will also say something that I'm worried we're not going to get in season two, and I'm really pissed that Paramount won't even let them film an end for the show now
I
that they
know.
know that the show that there isn't going to be a season three is with Sam. The character, I love Sam's
I adore
character.
Sam. Yes.
And I will say, Sam really made me feel seen because I feel like Sam is like a child of Data,
Mm-hmm.
but for Black women and Black people who didn't have that same connection with Data. I loved Data, but I was like, oh, this is someone who's like more embodied, like I am, or like a
Mm-hmm.
member of my family. But I'm so interested to see kind of some discussion about why the photonics would choose to embody
Right.
Sam in the way that they do. Why
Yeah.
is Sam embodied as a Black girl?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh,
I
that
think
is.
that there's a very interesting discussion to be had there because I don't think we as viewers experience it as blackface. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, she's somewhat like Odo in that they have
Mm-hmm.
made a decision about how she will present, and she could have presented in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And she could have gendered in a completely different way. And
Yeah.
so there are lots of questions there about like what was it about the Black girl experience that the photonics felt were important for the experience of the emissary. And some of that is addressed in the specific episode of Academy that does
Yes.
this. But I will just say, I think there's lots of queer and Black things to be unpacked there.
Oh yeah, no, I that's what I'm writing about now. That fifth episode, I saw so many people being like, "Oh, it's just which is for listener, fifth episode is the episode where they where Sam sort of explores the history with Cisco and her relationship to Cisco. And a lot of people relegating that it's like, "Oh, it's just nostalgia. It's just nostalgic references." And for me, I thought there was so much metatextually going on with relationship to Deep Space Nine and Avery Brooks as a person and the importance to of Deep Space Nine to marginalized and Black history specifically, and
Hmm.
having this young Black girl going and exploring her relationship to like she doesn't have any anchor to identity. She doesn't have a culture to draw upon, and so she's looking to history for someone to find an identity and find a concrete path. Like, oh, this is what I should do, and finding that in a character like Cisco, who she there is no definitive answer on his life and his story, and trying to find a concrete answer to something that is more, as we were talking about earlier, faith and religion and how we influence each other through cultures. How Cisco was created by the prophets, but then how he also the prophets he created the prophets as well and how they perceive the world and that constant non-linearity of influence across time and then her sort of being like, oh, I have to find myself and I can use history to inform who I am and use it to help guide me, but neither does it dictate to me who I end up being. And that is something
Yes.
that so many marginalized cultures and colonized cultures, that's a thing that so many of us have to go through, and especially for the Black community. And then Avery Brooks's importance as both within the text of Deuce 9 and how he talked about Blackness within that show, but also was such a great advocate outside of the show, on the set of the show, for queer people. Like he directed the Sapphic episode of Deep Space Nine and
I
chose
didn't
not.
know that actually.
Oh, this is one of my favorite stories about him ever, and it's one that I always point to where in that episode he directed the episode where Jadzia and the other Trill woman kiss. And the day that they were filming that episode, I think it was like, I don't know, EW or something, some press outlet wanted to be on set to be like, we're gonna film stuff about the big gay episode of Star Trek, and it's gonna be this big thing. And he specifically said, no, you're not allowed on my set because I don't want to make a spectacle of this queer moment. And he
Mm,
directed it in such a normalized way, and that always spoke to me as just like his as a someone who understood this cross community solidarity and understanding of like not to spectralize this queer moment that I just found so beautiful. And so he's such this great advocate that as a human being that I think that whole episode was just so metatextually wrestling with all that complexity of both within the queer community, the black community, the within the text of the show, within photonics, Deep Space Nine's relationship to Star Trek as a whole. I just found that so complicated. Anyways, I'm ranting. I apologize that this has become me ranting at you about Star Trek, but again, this is why I wanted to talk to you about this.
no, I mean I'm really grateful to hear that story, and it also has me thinking about I watched Ellen's Kiss live on
Mm-hmm.
television when it happened, and it has me thinking about the parallels there with Star Trek, the original series, being the first TV show to air an interracial kiss.
Yes, yeah.
And that DS9 didn't break that barrier, but he also understood that episode, I'm fairly certain, knowing the influence he had in terms of thinking about Black history in relation to the show, that it must have been partly understanding that episode in that lineage of
Mm-hmm.
and it also, I was thinking while you were talking about Ira Stephen Bear and the way that he has expressed regret
Mm-hmm.
about not fighting harder with the network to make Garrick an openly gay character,
Mm-hmm.
and how we read, not really even as fanfic, like the relationship between Julian Bashir and
Mm-hmm.
Garrick as very queer and romantic inflected.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's um a lot there that Starfleet Academy was very directly picking up on. And so
Mm-hmm.
there was like a profound irony of fans saying this show is not Trek because you can tell I you can see it in the first episode right off the bat that this writer's room, one, had watched all of Trek very closely,
Yes.
read it very closely as a text, and had also really paid attention to all the things fans had said over the years about the things that meant something to them about the franchise. And they put all of that into the show, including I'm not going to say what it was because I don't want to put the spoiler out there, but Tawny Newsom's cameo in that
Mm-hmm.
particular
Mm-hmm.
episode um, was extraordinarily powerful. And I specifically want to shout out Tawny because she was also behind the camera as part of the
Yeah.
writer's room for
She
this
is one of the
show.
writers of the episode as well. Yeah.
And also that tradition of being a franchise where actors moved into these production positions and that the franchise became a training place. She's not the first person. Jonathan Frakes got to start as a director on the show.
Mm-hmm.
LeVar Burton also got directing experience. Gates McFadden has talked about how she had to fight for that opportunity in ways that her male
Counterparts
co-cast
did
members
not.
didn't
Yeah.
have to.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot, by the way, from watching Gates talk about that.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, yeah. No, there's a lot of that and the misogyny
yes.
behind the scenes of
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, obviously we could rant at each other about
I know.
this.
I wanted to
I would
my
love to come back and rant with you about
we
Star
should.
Trek
I
anytime.
I know, and I wanted to wrap us out by actually my next question is we're talking so much about Star Trek. I know the edge of space time is in large part talking about Star Trek and your relationship to Star Trek. So I wanted to just give you a moment to sort of tell me, the audience, about the edge of space time, especially my Trekkie audience, for what you think they will love to find within the book, and why they should pick it up.
So there's a fuck ton of Trek in this book. Number
Yes,
one,
good,
I will
good,
just
good.
say, um, I I talk about Star Trek before the voyage home early in the
Yes.
book. That was a lot of fun watching, rewatching that. There's TNG in the book. There's a lot of discovery in the book.
Yay, good.
And actually, we happened to be recording this on a day that an excerpt from the book went live at popsci.com, which I
Okay.
encourage people to go find. I'll give you the link so you
Yeah,
can
please.
put it
I'll put it down in the description for listeners.
in the description. That's actually an excerpt from the last chapter of the book, You Are Not Safe in Science. And it's a discussion about the the January 1967 issue of the magazine Ebony, which for people who
Mm-hmm.
aren't familiar is a black magazine
Mm-hmm.
aimed at black readers, especially black women. Nichelle Nichols was on the cover of the January 1967 issue. And this is just a few months after Star Trek first premiered on NBC in the United States. And the cover story, which is unsigned, that's tangential but interesting. The cover story declares her the first Negro astronaut, a triumph of modern day television over NASA.
Wow.
And it's very clear the challenge that they were putting out there, which is how is
Mm-hmm.
it that this ended up on television and you all have been sending people to space? What is happening here? And there's an arc there, which is that Nichelle Nichols went on to become an advocate who promoted um, women and men of color to into the space program. Sally Ride becomes one of the people who's part of that cohort. Dr. Mae Jemison, who almost 3 decades later becomes the first Black woman in space, is also influenced by that outreach and that program. So that's one chapter, but I just want to say that, okay, now I have to do the thing that my publicist would have wanted me to say, which is that this is a book about what it means to be in the cosmos and look at the cosmos from its margins, from its
Mm-hmm.
edges, whether we're talking about the event horizon of a black hole or from the margins of, queer story. I loved using Stamets and Culver to talk about quantum gravity.
Oh, that's really cool.
For the disco fans, for the Wilson Cruz super fans like me, and the Anthony Rapp super fans, I love the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were a beautiful couple, and their story was so powerful for me, and it was so fun using a gay love story to explain quantum gravity to people. So that's the kind of stuff that you will find in The Edge of Space Time.
Hell
So I
yeah.
hope you will consider grabbing a copy from your local indie bookstore or your library if that's your best option. Libraries are great. Authors are never mad at people for borrowing from the
Yes.
library.
No, support your local library, especially right now, everybody. Well, that is amazing. I personally am very excited to read the book, and thank you so much for chatting with me and letting me read you a little bit about Star Trek, but also again, for listeners too, you should also pick up her other book, The Disordered Cosmos. It's such a phenomenal work. There it is as well. Highly recommend it. And it was an absolute honor to have you on and to talk about this. And we will certainly chat at some point again about Star Trek, I hope. So I would love
Yes.
that. So, all right, everybody, go buy the book, and I will see you all later. I hope you all live long and prosper.